The stars shone brightly above the galaxy, but on the battlefield of the Zyrex Dominion, the night was filled with the sounds of destruction. Princess Selara, the youngest and most fierce of the Zyrex royal family, stood at the helm of her warship, commanding her fleet to engage the enemy. The battle had been intense, but she thrived in the chaos of war. It was what she had been trained for all her life. Her purple skin gleamed under the flashing lights, her golden eyes burning with the fire of a warrior. Selara wasn't like other royals. She had always been different. While her family ruled the Zyrex Dominion with fear and cruelty, she saw things differently. She had grown tired of the endless conquests and oppression that her empire carried out across the galaxy. Her people, the Zyrex, were known for their power and their ruthlessness. But Selara believed there was another way, a way to stop the cycle of bloodshed. But tonight, she had been forced to act. The Zyrex were in the middle of a brutal war with the human forces, and her father, the Emperor, had ordered a full-scale attack on a peaceful human colony. Selara couldn't let that happen. She had joined the battle not as a princess, but as a rebel, determined to make her mark and show her empire that there was another way to lead. The battle was going in her favor. Her warship, the Valkyr, was superior in technology and firepower, and the enemy ships were falling one by one. But there was one thing Selara didn't count on: betrayal. As she ordered another strike, her command console suddenly flared with red warning lights. The ship rocked violently, and alarms blared in her ears. "What's happening?" she demanded. The answer came too late. A surprise attack from a hidden fleet of enemy ships tore through her defenses. The ship was hit hard, and Selara's console exploded in front of her, sending a shockwave that threw her across the bridge. Pain surged through her body as she struggled to stay conscious. The ship was in freefall now, spinning out of control. Selara gritted her teeth and pulled herself up. "No," she muttered, slamming her fist into the console in frustration. The monitors flashed, showing the imminent destruction of the ship. Selara wasn't one to give up easily. She quickly activated the emergency escape system, and the ship's escape pod launched into the unknown. Her body was battered, her head spinning, but she couldn't afford to stop. She was a princess, a warrior, and she had no intention of dying like this. The pod tore through the atmosphere, crashing toward an unknown planet far below. She barely managed to stay conscious, clutching the controls as the pod plummeted. The ground was coming fast, and there was no way to stop the impact. With one last, desperate pull, she ejected from the pod just before it slammed into the surface. Selara's body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Her vision blurred, and everything around her seemed to spin. Blood, her own blood, stained the dirt beneath her, and her side throbbed with pain. She couldn't think. She couldn't move. But she had to. She had to survive. Her enemies would be looking for her, and if they found her, it would be the end. Forcing herself to stand, she stumbled forward. Her legs were unsteady, and the pain in her side felt like it was tearing her apart. She had to get away, away from the wreckage, away from everything. The forest ahead seemed like the only place where she could hide, but she knew she couldn't trust anything. As she staggered forward, her breath coming in short gasps, she saw a shadow moving in the distance. Her golden eyes narrowed as she tried to focus through the dizziness. A human. What was a human doing here? The planet was far from any known human colony. She couldn't be sure whether the person was a threat or a survivor of the crash. But she wasn't in any condition to fight. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Stay back," she growled, her fangs showing as she lifted her arm in warning. She had to seem strong, had to make sure this human knew she wasn't an easy target. But the human didn't listen. Instead, the figure approached with calm, steady steps, a medical bag slung over his shoulder. Selara's vision blurred again, and she felt herself sinking to her knees. She couldn't stay awake much longer. The pain was overwhelming. Then a hand gripped her arm, steadying her. She looked up to see the human's face, young, yet serious, with dark brown hair and a calm expression. His eyes were full of purpose, not fear. "You're in bad shape," the human said, his voice surprisingly soft but firm. "I'm going to help you, okay?" Solara recoiled instinctively, but her strength was fading fast. She tried to pull away, but it was no use. "I don't need your help," she hissed through clenched teeth. "You should leave me." "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice unwavering. "You're hurt. I can help." He knelt beside her, gently taking her arm and inspecting the wound in her side. Solara felt a sharp pain shoot through her, but she couldn't fight him off anymore. Her vision was swimming, and the world around her felt like it was slipping away. "I told you," she whispered weakly. "I don't need." Her words trailed off as her head fell forward, and she lost consciousness. The sun was low in the sky when Solara finally woke again. The first thing she noticed was the warmth around her. She was lying on something soft, wrapped in what felt like a blanket. The pain in her side was dull but still present. Her golden eyes opened slowly, and she scanned the room. She wasn't dead. This wasn't an enemy camp. There were no weapons, no signs of danger. She was in a small cabin, surrounded by unfamiliar equipment and herbs. She sat up, wincing as her side flared with pain. The room was quiet, the only sound coming from the soft crackle of a fire in the corner. "Where am I?" she muttered, trying to stand. "You're in my cabin," came the human's voice. He was sitting across the room, reading a medical journal. He didn't look surprised to see her awake, just calm, as if this was an everyday occurrence for him. Solara looked at him, still suspicious. "You?" she started but then stopped. She had to admit something to herself. If it weren't for him, she would have died. "You saved me." The human nodded. "I did what anyone would do." Solara felt a strange feeling rising in her chest. She didn't know what it was. Maybe gratitude, maybe something else. But she didn't trust it. She was a princess, a warrior. She wasn't supposed to need anyone. She couldn't afford to be weak. But there he was, this human, looking at her as if she were just another person in need of help. "Why?" she asked, her voice still hoarse. "Why would you help me? You're human. I'm your enemy." He smiled slightly. "I'm a medic. That's what I do. I help people." Solara didn't know how to respond. She was used to people fearing her, bowing before her, or trying to kill her. But this human didn't seem afraid. "You're strange," she muttered. He chuckled. "I've been called worse." Dr. Daniel Carter had seen a lot in his time as a field medic. He had worked in countless battlefields, helping soldiers on both sides of wars, trying to save lives where he could. He was a man who had chosen to be a healer, even in the middle of chaos. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and he had dedicated his life to saving the wounded, no matter their background. Whether they were humans or aliens, he did not discriminate. Pain and suffering were universal, and it was his job to relieve it. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for the situation he was in now. It had been a quiet day, too quiet, when he had been out in the woods, gathering some medicinal herbs. The small settlement he had been living in had been peaceful for the past few months. Daniel had been staying there as a part of a humanitarian mission, far away from the wars and the conflicts happening between the human forces and the Zyrex Dominion. He had been doing what he loved, helping the wounded, healing the sick, and treating injuries. He hadn't expected to find himself in the middle of a war zone again. That's when it happened. The crash. A bright streak of light cut through the sky, followed by the deafening sound of something large smashing into the earth. Daniel had immediately rushed toward the source of the crash. He had no idea what it was, but as a medic, his first instinct was always to help. The forest was thick and dense, but he pushed through the underbrush, ignoring the sharp branches that scraped at his face. When he arrived at the crash site, he found a ship, no, more like a wreck, scattered across the clearing. The remains of a large, flaming pod lay in pieces, surrounded by trees that had been torn apart. The ship's wreckage hissed as it cooled down, sending clouds of smoke into the air. Daniel's eyes searched for any signs of life. He had to help whoever was inside. That's when he saw her. She was on the ground, her violet skin almost glowing in the moonlight, with her body lying in a pool of her own blood. Her side was badly torn, and Daniel could see the gash was deep. There was no way she would survive on her own. Her face was beautiful in a fierce sort of way, her sharp features and golden eyes flashing even in unconsciousness. But it was clear that she was seriously injured. The smell of her blood, silver and metallic, filled the air, making his stomach churn. Daniel's first reaction was to assess the situation. His mind worked quickly. He needed to get to her fast, make sure she was still breathing, and figure out how to stop the bleeding. He had no idea who she was, if she was an enemy soldier, a bystander, or someone from another race entirely. But right now, she was a person in pain, and that was all that mattered. Without thinking twice, he rushed to her side. She was still breathing, but her pulse was weak. He quickly checked her wound. Definitely bad. Too bad for a quick patch-up. This wasn't something you could just tie off and send someone on their way. She needed surgery, immediately. But this wasn't a hospital. This wasn't even a makeshift clinic. It was just him, alone, in the middle of a forest with a dying alien princess. He took a deep breath and did what he knew best. The first thing he needed to do was stop the bleeding. He tore a piece of fabric from his jacket and applied pressure to the wound. The bleeding slowed, but he couldn't risk moving her too much without proper tools. Still, he couldn't just leave her there to die. She was a stranger, but in his eyes, she was human too. The fact that she wasn't human didn't matter to him. "Come on," he muttered to himself as he gathered all his medical supplies and set up a small space nearby. Her golden eyes fluttered open just as he was finishing up. She looked at him with confusion and pain. She tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. Her body sagged, and she fell back against the ground. The sharp pain on her side must have been unbearable. "You're alive," Daniel said softly, surprised at how weak his voice sounded. "I wasn't sure if you'd make it." The alien princess' lips curled into a faint, pained snarl. "What do you want, human?" Her voice was hoarse, but still commanding. Daniel felt a jolt of confusion at her harsh tone, but he quickly brushed it off. This was no time to be upset. "I just want to help you," he replied, trying to keep his tone calm. "You were seriously injured. I'm not your enemy." Her eyes narrowed, and her breathing became ragged. "I don't need your help," she growled. "I'm fine. You can leave now." Daniel almost smiled at her defiance, but there was no humor in the situation. "You're not fine. You're barely conscious, and you've lost a lot of blood. If I leave, you're going to die." She said nothing, just glared at him in silence, but it was clear she wasn't going to argue anymore. With a deep sigh, Daniel continued working. The next few hours were a blur as he worked quickly but carefully. There wasn't much in his medical kit to work with, but he had enough experience to make do. He applied a makeshift bandage to her side, trying his best to close the wound. He had no idea if she would survive, but he refused to let her die on his watch. Through the haze of exhaustion, Daniel couldn't help but wonder about her. She wasn't just any alien. There was something regal about her, the way she carried herself even in pain. Her posture, the look in her eyes. He had seen enough soldiers to know that she wasn't just a random soldier. No, she had the air of someone important, someone powerful. As he continued to work, she slowly drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, she tried to push him away, but her strength was waning. Eventually, she stopped trying to fight him, and Daniel was able to focus on getting her patched up as best as he could. Once he had finished, he sat back and wiped the sweat from his brow. His hands were trembling slightly from the adrenaline, but he was satisfied with the work he had done. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep her alive for now. He could only hope she would wake up fully. The next time she opened her eyes, she didn't try to fight him. She simply stared at him, her golden eyes intense as ever. She wasn't smiling, but there was something different in her gaze. It was almost as if she was trying to figure him out. "Why?" she asked, her voice weaker than before. "Why did you save me?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Because I'm a medic. It's what I do." She blinked in confusion. "But I'm not human." He nodded. "No, you're not. But you're still a person. And right now, you're someone who needs help." The princess looked at him for a long moment before slowly closing her eyes again. Maybe she was finally starting to understand. Daniel sat down on the floor, watching her. His mission had changed in that moment. Saving lives wasn't just about tending to injuries. It was about offering hope, no matter who the person was. And that's what he would do, even for a princess who had fallen from the stars. Silara's head throbbed as she regained consciousness. The last thing she remembered was the human medic treating her wounds before everything went dark. She tried to open her eyes, but the light hurt, and her body felt heavy. Slowly, she managed to lift her eyelids, squinting against the pain. The first thing she saw was a fire burning softly in the corner of the small room. The flickering light danced over wooden walls and the simple furnishings. It smelled like herbs, wood, and something else. Something faintly comforting. She was no longer lying on the cold, hard ground of the forest, but on a soft bed, covered in blankets. Her side still hurt, but the pain wasn't as sharp as before. She could feel the bandages wrapped tightly around her wound, and though they weren't perfect, they were doing their job. She wondered how long she had been unconscious. As she tried to sit up, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Careful, you're still healing." Silara froze, her hand instinctively going to her side. She looked toward the sound of the voice. It was the human. He was sitting at a small table near the fire, looking down at some kind of medical scroll. He didn't look surprised to see her awake, just calm and focused. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse and weak. She wasn't sure what to make of this human. He had saved her life, but that didn't mean she trusted him. He was still her enemy, or so she thought. After all, she was a princess of the Zyrex Dominion, an empire built on strength and power. Humans were nothing but pests in the eyes of her people. The human didn't seem bothered by her sharp tone. "I don't want anything from you," he said simply. "I'm just here to make sure you're okay." Zilara narrowed her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, trying to stand, but her body refused to cooperate. The pain in her side flared up again, and she stumbled. The human was immediately at her side, steadying her. His hand was firm on her shoulder, but it wasn't rough or commanding. There was no arrogance in his touch, no judgment. It was just gentle. "I think it's a little early for that," the human said with a small smile. "You're still healing. You've been unconscious for 2 days." 2 days. Silara couldn't believe it. She had no idea how much time had passed, but it felt like only a few hours to her. Her head was still spinning from the injury, and the wound on her side was pulsing with every heartbeat. "I'm fine," she insisted again, though this time her voice didn't sound as certain. She hated the weakness in her tone, but there was nothing she could do about it. Her strength had left her, and her body was demanding rest. The human didn't push her. Instead, he helped her settle back into the bed. "Rest is the best thing for you right now. Your body needs time to heal." Silara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Despite her pride as a warrior, she couldn't deny the exhaustion that had settled in her bones. She leaned back against the pillows and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the room wash over her. For a while, there was silence between them. Silara wasn't sure what to say. This human had saved her life, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she shouldn't be here, lying in some human's home, relying on him for help. Finally, the human spoke again. "You were lucky I found you when I did. You took quite a hit." He looked at her with an almost sad expression, as if he saw more than just a wounded stranger. "If I hadn't gotten there when I did, you might not have made it." Professor Park finally spoke up, her scales now showing a complex pattern of blues and golds. How do they handle navigation without AI assistance? Jin-Ho responded by displaying images of paper charts, sextants, and early navigation computers. They used the stars, magnetic fields, and mechanical instruments. Every officer learned these skills. They could determine their position anywhere on Earth's oceans. The presentation concluded with footage of a full fleet exercise. Dozens of ships moving in perfect coordination, hundreds of aircraft taking off and landing, all orchestrated without a single quantum computer or AI system. As the lights came back up, the classroom remained unusually quiet. Students looked at each other, their various forms showing signs of deep thought and reconsideration. Many had begun taking rapid notes, others were quietly discussing the implications. Mireille moved to the front of the room. "I think," she said, her silver skin pulsing softly, "we need to reconsider what we mean by primitive technology." Jin-Ho looked at his research partners. Haenul's glowing form, Tai-Young's swirling membrane, and back to Mireille's thoughtful expression. They had shown their classmates something remarkable, but they all knew this was just the beginning of their research into Earth's impressive naval history. Professor Park's scales had settled into a deep blue of contemplation. For the first time since Jin-Ho had started this project, she looked genuinely intrigued. The study of Earth's naval achievements was about to become a much larger project than anyone had expected. The fourth research session found the group huddled in their favorite study room, surrounded by glowing displays of Earth's naval technology. The room had become their second home, with snacks from 5 different planetary cultures scattered across the tables and data crystals piled in neat stacks. "Their innovation is what fascinates me," Haenul said, his silicon-based form glowing brightly as he manipulated a 3-dimensional image of an early radar system. "Look at how they developed radar and sonar. Many spacefaring races skipped these steps entirely, moving straight to quantum scanning." Mireille nodded, her silver skin rippling with interest. She had joined their research group after the classroom presentation, her initial skepticism completely replaced by genuine curiosity. They solved complex problems with simple solutions, she observed, studying the mechanical systems. Even today, some of their basic principles are used in our most advanced ships. Jin-Ho pulled up another display, his tendrils moving excitedly. They achieve things with analog technology that some current civilizations struggle with using quantum computers. He pointed to a diagram of an anti-submarine warfare system. "Look at this passive sonar array. Pure mechanical and electronic components, but it could track objects underwater for kilometers." Tai-Young's membrane shifted to a deep blue of concentration. "My people never considered sound waves for detection. We waited until we developed particle sensors. But these humans, they used everything available to them." The group spent hours examining Earth's technological development. They found records of mechanical fire control computers that could calculate complex ballistic trajectories without digital assistance. These devices used gears, cams, and springs to solve mathematical equations that guided massive naval guns. "It's beautiful in its simplicity," Haenul said, his crystalline structure chiming softly as he moved closer to examine a cutaway diagram. "No power requirements, no software to fail, just pure mechanical engineering." Mireille brought up records of early submarine warfare. "Look at this depth-keeping system. No quantum fields, no gravity manipulation. They used ballast tanks and hydroplanes, all controlled by human operators. That's what keeps surprising me," Jin-Ho added, his tendrils waving thoughtfully. They didn't wait for perfect solutions. They worked with what they had and made it work amazingly well. The displays showed more examples of human ingenuity, systems for stabilizing ships in heavy seas using mechanical gyroscopes, analog computers for navigation that could function without power, and damage control techniques that could keep a heavily damaged ship afloat. Most species today would consider these methods primitive, Tai Young observed, his membrane rippling. But there's an elegance to them. They're reliable, repairable, and surprisingly effective. The presentation continued as they showed more connections between Earth's naval past and their spacefaring present. They explained how concepts like damage control, resource management, and long-range navigation had all been developed during Earth's Age of Sail. Consider their approach to exploration, Tai Young said, his membrane showing patterns of academic excitement. Other species waited until they had perfect maps and safe routes. Humans had centuries of experience in venturing into unknown waters with just basic instruments and courage. The board members watched footage of early human space missions alongside historical ocean voyages. The similarities were striking. Small crews in confined spaces, venturing into the unknown, relying on their training and each other to survive. But the cultural impact goes deeper, Mayray continued. Look at their language. She displayed a list of common space terms: captain, deck, port, starboard, crew quarters. These all came from their maritime traditions. They didn't just copy the technology. They transferred an entire cultural framework to space travel. One board member, whose gaseous form swirled with confusion, spoke up. How did this affect their early space development? Jin Ho responded, bringing up historical records. They treated their first space stations like ports, he explained. They already understood concepts like resupply, maintenance schedules, and crew rotation from their naval experience. While other species had to develop these protocols from scratch, humans simply adapted their existing procedures. The presentation showed how Earth's naval traditions had influenced everything from ship design to emergency procedures. Their spacecraft had dedicated damage control teams, just like their ocean-going vessels. They used similar protocols for communication, navigation, and combat. Most importantly, Mayray said, her silver skin pulsing with emphasis, their naval experience taught them to be self-reliant. Every ship, whether on water or in space, had to be capable of operating independently for long periods. The board chamber fell silent as they considered the implications. A culture that had spent centuries mastering ocean travel had applied those lessons to the greatest challenge of all, space exploration. There's one more thing, Jin Ho added, his tendrils moving slowly. Their naval traditions gave them something else, a way of thinking about vast distances and long missions. They already understood that ships were more than just vehicles. They were communities, homes for their crews. The presentation concluded with a comparison of modern human and alien spacecraft. The human designs clearly showed their naval heritage, from the layout of their bridges to the way they organized their crew quarters. As the lights came back up, the board members sat in thoughtful silence. Finally, the crystalline senior member spoke. We may need to revise our understanding of technological development, they said. Perhaps there is more than one path to the stars. Mayray and her team gathered their data crystals, knowing they had changed how the Academy viewed human history. Their research had shown that sometimes the best preparation for the future could come from understanding the past. The impact of their presentation would continue to ripple through academic circles. Earth's journey from wooden ships to starships was more than just a story of technological progress. It was a testament to the power of cultural continuity and the unexpected ways that historical experience could shape a species' future. The research lab hummed with activity as Hay Newell studied the holographic displays of modern human spacecraft. His silicon form cast rainbow reflections across the walls as he moved around the three-dimensional images floating in the air. It all makes sense now, Hay Newell said, his crystalline structure vibrating with excitement as he examined the designs of modern human ships. Look at their space vessel layouts. They're still using concepts from their naval vessels. Tai Young floated closer, his membrane rippling as he manipulated the hologram. His watery form moved gracefully through the projected light, highlighting various features of the spacecraft. The way they organized their crew, their command structure, even their terminology. It's all based on their naval heritage. Professor Park stood in the doorway, her scales now showing a complex pattern of blues and golds that indicated deep thought. She had come a long way from dismissing their research as a waste of time. Perhaps, she admitted, moving closer to examine the displays, we have much to learn from Earth's past. Jin-Ho worked at another terminal, his tendrils moving steadily as he pulled up comparison data. Look at these emergency protocols, he said, displaying side-by-side images of an old nuclear submarine and a modern patrol cruiser. The damage control procedures are almost identical. Mai Rei's silver skin flickered with interest as she studied the procedures. They even maintain the same chain of command during emergencies. The damage control teams on their space vessels train using scenarios developed from naval incidents. The group had spent weeks analyzing modern human spacecraft, finding countless connections to Earth's maritime past. Every detail, from the layout of command centers to the organization of living quarters, showed clear naval influence. What fascinates me most, Tae-young said, his membrane shifting to a deep blue of concentration, is how they've adapted old solutions to new problems. He highlighted the life support systems of a modern vessel. Look at these backup systems, purely mechanical, just like the emergency systems on their old submarines. Hanul moved to another display showing crew quarters. They still arrange their crews in divisions and departments, just like their old ships. Even their maintenance schedules follow patterns developed centuries ago. Professor Park's scales rippled with interest as she examined the data. Their experience with long-duration ocean voyages clearly influenced their approach to space travel. They understood the psychological aspects of keeping crews healthy during extended missions. The research team had discovered that human spacecraft shared many features with their ocean-going predecessors. The bridges of modern vessels still placed the captain in a central position, surrounded by key officers. Engineering sections were organized similarly to engine rooms on naval ships. Even their combat tactics show naval influence, Jin-Ho noted, bringing up tactical displays. Look at how their space fleets maneuver. They treat space like a three-dimensional ocean. Mai Rei added more data to the display. And their approach to training hasn't changed much either. Space crew members still spend months learning their duties before their first deployment, just like naval crews did. Professor Park moved closer to examine a detailed schematic of a human battlecruiser. The redundancy in their systems, it's remarkable. They build their space vessels to survive damage, just like their ocean ships. The group spent hours analyzing more connections. They found that humans still used naval ranks in space, maintained similar discipline systems, and even kept maritime traditions like naming vessels after historical figures or places. What impresses me most, Haenul said, his crystalline form pulsing with enthusiasm, is how they've preserved the best aspects of their naval heritage while adapting to new technologies. Tae-young manipulated the hologram to show a modern engine room. They've integrated quantum drives and artificial gravity, but the basic layout still follows naval engineering principles. It's efficient and practical. Professor Park's scales had settled into a deep blue of appreciation. Their naval experience gave them something invaluable: centuries of practical knowledge about operating complex vessels in hostile environments. As the day cycle drew to a close, the research team realized they had uncovered something significant. Humanity's transition from sea to space wasn't just a technological evolution. It was a continuous thread of experience, knowledge, and tradition. We should prepare a detailed report for the Academy's engineering department, Mai Rei suggested, her silver skin showing patterns of scholarly excitement. There might be valuable lessons in human naval design that could benefit modern spacecraft development. The others agreed. What had started as historical research had revealed important insights about spacecraft design and operation. Human naval heritage wasn't just history. It was a living tradition that continued to influence their approach to space exploration. Professor Park moved toward the door, but paused to look back at the displays. "Continue your research," she said, her scales showing approval. "I believe you've discovered something more significant than any of us initially realized." The team members exchanged glances, their various forms showing signs of satisfaction and determination. They had helped change the Academy's understanding of human technological development, and their work was far from over. The Great Hall of the Galactic Historical Academy had never been so crowded. Students and professors from hundreds of worlds filled every available space, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic life. Jin-Ho stood at the podium, his tendrils steady as he prepared to deliver the final presentation of their groundbreaking research. Hae-Newell's silicon form sparkled under the hall's lights, while Tai-Young's membrane showed patterns of excited anticipation. Mei-Ray stood tall, her silver skin glowing with professional pride. Over the past months, they had become minor celebrities in academic circles, their research changing how the galaxy viewed human technological development. The holographic displays came to life, filling the vast space above the audience with images of Earth's naval history. The presentation began with ancient sailing ships, progressed through the age of steel warships, and concluded with modern space vessels. Earth's naval history isn't just about warfare, Jin-Ho stated, his voice clear and confident. It's about innovation, adaptation, and the ability to accomplish the impossible with limited resources. These lessons are more relevant now than ever. The audience watched in fascination as the team demonstrated how human naval experience had shaped their approach to space exploration. They showed how submarine operations had prepared humans for the challenges of living in enclosed spaces for long periods. They explained how naval damage control procedures had evolved into modern spacecraft emergency protocols. Look at how they handled the unknown, Hae-Newell added, his crystalline structure chiming softly as he spoke. When other species waited for perfect solutions, humans used what they had and made it work. Mei-Ray presented data showing how several major spacefaring races were already beginning to re-examine their own vessel designs. The Centaurians have incorporated human-style damage control systems into their latest ships, she explained. The Rigelian fleet is studying Earth's naval command structures. Tai-Young demonstrated how human naval architecture had influenced spacecraft design across the galaxy. His membrane rippled with enthusiasm as he showed how ancient principles of compartmentalization and redundancy were being adopted by modern shipbuilders. The presentation moved through centuries of human innovation, showing how each development in naval technology had contributed to their success in space. The audience learned about concepts like fleet logistics, crew rotation, and long-range navigation, all developed during Earth's maritime era. What we've discovered, Jin-Ho continued, is that progress doesn't always mean waiting for advanced technology. Sometimes the best solutions come from experience, ingenuity, and the willingness to face challenges with whatever tools are available. News of their findings was already spreading through the galaxy's academic networks. Representatives from major shipbuilding corporations sat in the audience, taking careful notes. Military observers from various species watched with intense interest. The team showed how human naval traditions had created a framework for space exploration that other species were only now beginning to appreciate. They explained how centuries of maritime experience had given humans an innate understanding of operating in three-dimensional space. As the presentation neared its end, Jin-Ho displayed a final image, an ancient Earth aircraft carrier alongside a modern human space carrier. The similarities in design and purpose were striking. "The legacy of Earth's navies lives on," he said, his tendrils moving gracefully, not just in human vessels, but increasingly in ships across the galaxy. Their solutions to age-old problems of survival, navigation, and combat continue to influence modern design. The audience rose in applause as the presentation concluded. Species that normally showed no emotion displayed clear signs of appreciation. Even the most conservative academics seemed impressed.